The thunderous sound of hooves hitting the hard, packed earth drowned out Victoria Sinclair's terrified whimpers as she clung desperately to the saddle of her runaway horse. The vast Montana Territory landscape of 1876 blurred around her as the stallion, spooked by a rattlesnake, bolted across the open prairie with no sign of slowing. Her traveling trunk had long since tumbled off, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the growing certainty that she was going to die far from home, alone in this untamed wilderness. Victoria had never imagined her journey west would end like this. The proper Boston socialite had embarked on this adventure to escape an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age. At 22, she had dreamed of independence, perhaps finding work as a schoolteacher in one of the frontier towns. Now those dreams seemed foolish as her grip weakened, and the ground below promised nothing but pain. Just as her fingers began to slip, a blur of movement appeared beside her. A rider on a powerful black stallion matched her pace, a determined expression on his sun-bronzed face. In one fluid motion, the stranger reached across the gap between their horses, wrapped a strong arm around her waist, and pulled her from her saddle onto his own. "I've got you," he said, his voice deep and steady as he slowed his horse to a stop. "You're safe now, miss." Victoria trembled against the solid wall of his chest, her heart hammering wildly as she processed what had just happened. She became acutely aware of the muscular arm still wrapped protectively around her waist, the first time she had ever been held by a man who wasn't her father. Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized she was practically sitting in a stranger's lap. I should," she stammered, trying to compose herself. "Easy now," the man said, loosening his grip but not fully releasing her. "Take a moment to catch your breath. That was quite a ride you were having." Victoria nodded, unable to find her voice as she looked up at her rescuer. He was handsome in a rugged way, with features chiseled by sun and wind, dark hair peeking out beneath a well-worn cowboy hat, and eyes the color of the sky above them. A small scar ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a slightly dangerous look that made her heart flutter for reasons entirely unrelated to her near-death experience. "Thank you," she finally managed. "You saved my life, Mr. Mason," he replied. "Mason Reed, and you are?" "Victoria Sinclair. I'm not from around here." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I gathered that much, Miss Sinclair. Your riding clothes are a bit too fine for these parts, and I don't recall seeing you in Timber Creek before." Victoria shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very aware of their improper position. "Mr. Reed, I should really—" Understanding dawned in his eyes, and he carefully helped her adjust to sit properly side-saddle in front of him. "My apologies, Miss Sinclair." Not exactly proper circumstances for introductions. "Nothing about this situation is proper," Victoria said, attempting a small smile despite her lingering terror. "I've never, that is to say." She took a deep breath, embarrassment coloring her words. "I've never been in a man's arms before today." Mason's expression softened, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low and earnest, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Then don't ever leave mine." The words hung between them, more intimate than they had any right to be between strangers. Victoria's breath caught in her throat as their eyes locked. The moment stretched, filled with something she couldn't name but could feel deep in her bones. Mason cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "What I mean to say is, you're safe now, and I'd be honored to escort you wherever you're headed." Reality came crashing back. "My things," Victoria said, suddenly remembering. "My trunk fell somewhere back there. It's all I have." "We'll find it," Mason assured her. "But first, let's get you to town. You look like you could use a hot meal and some rest. My ranch is closer, but I reckon the boarding house in Timber Creek would be more suitable for a lady like yourself." Victoria nodded gratefully, though a part of her wondered what his ranch might be like. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Just Mason, please, and there's no debt between us. Anyone would have done the same." But as he guided his horse toward town, Victoria knew that wasn't true. In her short time out west, she'd already learned that kindness wasn't something to be taken for granted. And the way her heart raced whenever Mason's arm steadied her over rough terrain told her there was something more at play than simple gratitude. Little did she know that this chance encounter would change the course of both their lives forever. The small frontier town of Timber Creek came into view as they crested a hill. Compared to Boston, it was hardly more than a cluster of wooden buildings straddling the main road, but to Victoria's weary eyes, it looked like salvation. A general store, saloon, blacksmith, and what appeared to be a small hotel lined the dusty street. The Timber Creek boarding house is run by Widow Parker, Mason explained as they approached. She's strict but fair. You'll be safe there until you figure out your next steps. Victoria nodded, realizing she hadn't shared her plans or lack thereof with Mason. I was hoping to find work here, actually. I have some experience as a teacher's assistant back east. Mason's eyebrows rose in surprise. Is that so? As it happens, our school teacher, Mrs. Foster, just left to care for her ailing mother in Denver. Town's been looking for a replacement. Hope bloomed in Victoria's chest. Perhaps her impulsive journey west hadn't been such a terrible idea after all. Do you think they might consider me? I serve on the town council, Mason said. I'd be happy to put in a good word, though you'll need to meet with Mayor Hollister. He takes education seriously, has 3 young ones of his own. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story white building with a small porch and neatly painted shutters. Mason dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help Victoria down. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, and she tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach as her feet touched the ground. "Thank you," she said, smoothing her rumpled traveling dress. "For everything. I'll fetch your trunk and bring it by later if you'll tell me where you lost it." Victoria described the location as best she could, and Mason nodded. "I know the spot. Should have it back to you before nightfall." Widow Parker turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor that softened somewhat when Mason explained Victoria's situation. After he left with a tip of his hat and another of those small smiles that made Victoria's heart skip, the widow showed her to a simple but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Bathrooms down the hall, meals are at 7, noon, and 6, she explained. "No gentlemen callers in the rooms, no exceptions." Victoria blushed. "I assure you, Mrs. Parker, I'm not expecting any callers." The older woman's knowing look suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Mason Reed doesn't rescue just anybody, dear. In fact, I've never seen him take such an interest in a newcomer before." "He was simply being kind," Victoria insisted. "Kind, yes, that he is, but there was something else in his eyes when he looked at you." Mrs. Parker shrugged. "No matter, rules are rules, even for the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties." After Mrs. Parker left, Victoria sat on the edge of the narrow bed, trying to process everything that had happened since morning. She had arrived in Timber Creek by stagecoach yesterday, spent the night at this very boarding house, and set out at dawn to explore the area. The horse she'd rented from the livery stable had seemed gentle enough until that rattlesnake appeared. Now here she was, without her belongings, in a strange town, with the image of a handsome cowboy burned into her mind. Worse, his words, "Then don't ever leave mine," kept replaying in her thoughts, even though she knew he hadn't meant them the way they sounded. Men like Mason Reed didn't fall for women like her at first sight. That kind of thing only happened in the dime novels her friend Charlotte used to smuggle into their dormitory at finishing school. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Parker holding a simple blue cotton dress and some basic toiletries. "Thought you might want to freshen up before dinner," the widow said. "You can borrow these until your things are returned." "That's very kind, thank you." "Mason sent word that he's located your trunk and will bring it by after dinner." Mrs. Parker's eyes twinkled. "Like I said, never seen him take such an interest." Victoria tried to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest at this news. "He's simply being a gentleman. Indeed he is. One of the finest men in these parts despite." Mrs. Parker trailed off, her expression clouding briefly before brightening again. "Well, that's not my story to tell. Dinner's in an hour, dear." After Mrs. Parker left, Victoria couldn't help wondering what the widow had been about to say. Despite what? What secrets did Mason Reed harbor behind those sky-blue eyes? She pushed the thought aside and focused on making herself presentable. The borrowed dress was simple but clean, a bit loose in the bodice and a touch short at the ankle, but far better than her dust-covered traveling clothes. After washing her face and pinning her honey-brown hair into a simple chignon, she felt almost human again. Dinner was a quiet affair with just Victoria, Mrs. Parker, and two other boarders, a young man who worked at the bank and an elderly woman who barely spoke. The food was simple but filling, and Victoria found herself ravenous after her ordeal. She had just finished helping Mrs. Parker clear the dishes when another knock came at the front door. Her pulse quickened as the widow opened it to reveal Mason Reed, hat in hand, her trunk beside him on the porch. "Evening, Mrs. Parker," he said, nodding respectfully before his eyes found Victoria. Something in his gaze made her feel as though she were the only person in the room. "Miss Sinclair." "Found your belongings, as promised." "Thank you, Mr. Reed Mason," she corrected herself, remembering his preference. "I can't tell you how grateful I am. Least I could do." He gestured to the trunk. "Wanted to let you know I mentioned you to Mayor Hollister. He's interested in meeting you tomorrow morning at 10 if that suits." Victoria couldn't believe her luck. "That would be perfect, thank you. I'll come by to escort you if you'd like." Before Victoria could answer, Mrs. Parker interjected, "That's very generous of you, Mason." "Victoria will be ready at 9:30. Mason's lips twitched with amusement. "Yes, madam." He turned back to Victoria. "Until tomorrow, then." "Until tomorrow," she echoed softly. After he left, Mrs. Parker helped Victoria carry her trunk upstairs. "That man," the widow said with a knowing shake of her head, "never seen him so eager to play escort." "I'm sure he's just being neighborly," Victoria insisted, though a part of her hoped there might be more to it. "Neighborly," Mrs. Parker repeated. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" That night, as Victoria unpacked her meager belongings, her thoughts kept returning to Mason Reed. There was something about him that called to her, something beyond his handsome face and timely rescue. Perhaps it was the gentleness in his hands as he'd helped her down from his horse, or the hint of sadness she'd glimpsed behind his smile. Whatever it was, she needed to guard her heart. She hadn't come west to find a husband, she'd come to escape that very fate and build a life on her own terms. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for the first kind man she encountered, no matter how her pulse raced when he was near. With that resolution firmly in mind, Victoria prepared for bed, determined to focus on tomorrow's meeting with the mayor. If she could secure the teaching position, she would have achieved the independence she dreamed of. That was what mattered now, not the mysterious cowboy with the heart-stopping smile and gentle hands. But as she drifted off to sleep, it was those sky-blue eyes she saw and those words that followed her into her dreams. "Then don't ever leave mine." True to his word, Mason arrived at precisely 9:30 the next morning. Victoria had chosen her most respectable outfit, a high-necked lavender dress with modest bustle, and a matching hat, and Mrs. Parker had helped her style her hair in a simple but elegant updo befitting a potential schoolteacher. "You look lovely," Mason said when she descended the stairs, the sincerity in his voice making her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she replied, noting that he too had dressed with care. His usual cowboy attire had been replaced by a clean white shirt, dark vest, and string tie. His hat, though still distinctly Western, looked newer than the one he'd worn yesterday. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Victoria placed her gloved hand in the crook of his elbow. The morning air was crisp and clear as they walked down Timber Creek's Main Street. Several townsfolk called out greetings to Mason, eyeing Victoria with undisguised curiosity. "Word travels fast in a small town," Mason explained apologetically. "By now, everyone knows about your arrival and assistants yesterday. I hope they're not getting the wrong impression, Victoria said, suddenly concerned about her reputation. Mason's expression turned serious. No one who matters would think ill of you, Miss Sinclair. This isn't Boston. Frontier towns have different standards of propriety by necessity. Victoria, she corrected him with a small smile, if I'm to call you Mason, it seems only fair. Victoria, he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his deep voice made her heart flutter. It suits you. Before she could respond, they arrived at a well-maintained building with mayor's office painted on the door. Mason knocked, and a booming voice called for them to enter. Mayor Hollister was a barrel-chested man with an impressive mustache and kind eyes. He rose from behind his desk as they entered, coming around to shake Victoria's hand with surprising gentleness. Miss Sinclair, a pleasure. Mason here tells me you're interested in our teaching position. I am, sir, Victoria confirmed. I served as an assistant teacher at Miss Winthrop's Academy for Young Ladies in Boston for 2 years. The interview that followed was thorough, but not unkind. Mayor Hollister asked about her educational background, teaching philosophy, and experience with children of different ages. Victoria answered honestly, occasionally glancing at Mason, who remained by her side, offering encouraging nods. Well, the mayor said finally, your credentials are impressive and we're in desperate need. The school has been closed for 2 weeks already. When could you start? Victoria blinked in surprise. You're offering me the position, unless you've changed your mind about wanting it, Mayor Hollister said with a chuckle. No, sir, I could start immediately. Excellent. The school term runs another 4 months. Salary is $40 a month with room and board included. There's a small teacher's cottage behind the schoolhouse. He glanced at Mason. Perhaps you could show Miss Sinclair the school after this. It would be my pleasure, Mason agreed. After signing the necessary paperwork and receiving a set of keys, Victoria found herself walking beside Mason again, this time toward the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. I can't believe it, she said, unable to contain her excitement. I actually did it. I have a job, a place to live. I'm truly independent now. Mason smiled down at her, something warm in his gaze. You don't strike me as a woman who's ever been anything but independent in spirit. Victoria laughed softly. Perhaps, though, my father might disagree. He was quite displeased when I refused to marry Mr. Harrison. Harrison? Mason's brow furrowed. Cornelius Harrison, Victoria explained, the name still leaving a bitter taste. A business associate of my father's. 57 years old, widowed 3 times and in need of a young wife to manage his household and provide heirs. She shuddered. When I refused, Father gave me an ultimatum: marry Harrison or be cut off without a penny. Mason's expression darkened. So you chose to make your own way instead. I had some savings from my teaching position, enough to get me west, where I'd heard women with education could find respectable employment. She shrugged. It was either that or a lifetime of misery as Mrs. Harrison. Brave choice, Mason said quietly. Not many would have your courage. Victoria felt a swell of pride at his words. What about you? Have you always lived in Timber Creek? A shadow passed over Mason's face. No, came here about 5 years ago from Colorado, needed a fresh start. There was clearly more to that story, but Victoria sensed now wasn't the time to press. They had reached the schoolhouse, a simple but sturdy building with large windows to let in natural light. Behind it stood a small cottage, just as the mayor had described. Mason unlocked the schoolhouse first, holding the door for Victoria to enter. The single room was dusty but well equipped, with rows of desks facing a teacher's desk on a raised platform, a blackboard covering one wall and bookshelves along another. It's perfect, Victoria breathed, already envisioning herself teaching here. School has about 20 students ages 6 to 16, Mason explained. Some only come when they can be spared from ranch work, especially the older boys. Victoria nodded, understanding the realities of frontier life. I'll do my best with whatever time I have with them. I know you will. The confidence in Mason's voice warmed her. The teacher's cottage proved to be a cozy two-room affair with a small parlor that doubled as a kitchen, a bedroom just big enough for a single bed and dresser, and a tiny washroom. Simple but clean, with basic furnishings already in place. "It's wonderful," Victoria said, genuinely pleased. After the finishing school dormitories and boarding houses, having a space entirely her own felt luxurious. "Needs a woman's touch," Mason observed, "but it's solid. Roof doesn't leak and the stove works well. You seem to know a lot about it." A hint of color touched Mason's cheeks. "I helped build it actually. Town raised it for Mrs. Foster when she came 3 years ago. You're a man of many talents, it seems." "Jack of all trades, master of none," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Except maybe ranching, that I know." "Your ranch is it far from town?" "About 5 miles north. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. 160 acres, decent herd of cattle, couple of good horses." Pride entered his voice when he spoke of it. "Built the house myself." Victoria tried to picture it Mason in a home of his own making, surrounded by open land and big sky. The image was surprisingly appealing. "Perhaps I could see it sometime," she said, then immediately blushed at her forwardness. Instead of being scandalized, Mason's face lit up. "I'd like that. Sunday, maybe. I could take you for a proper ride, show you some of the countryside when you're not hanging on for dear life." Victoria laughed. "Sunday would be lovely." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Mason cleared his throat. "I should let you get settled. School starts Monday, gives you 3 days to prepare." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Almost forgot. Got you this at the general store." Victoria unwrapped it to find a simple brass bell. "For calling the children to class," Mason explained. "Mrs. Foster took hers when she left." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Victoria deeply. "Thank you for everything." "My pleasure." Mason hesitated, then added softly, "I'm glad that horse spooked yesterday." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Victoria found herself responding in kind. "So am I." As Mason tipped his hat and turned to leave, Victoria felt as though something significant had shifted between them. What had begun as a chance rescue was becoming something more, a connection neither of them had anticipated, but both seemed eager to explore. Standing in the doorway of what would be her new home, watching Mason Reed walk back toward town, Victoria felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. For the first time in her life, she was truly on her own, free to make her own choices and follow her own heart. And her heart, it seemed, was already pointing her in a very specific direction. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Victoria prepared for her first day of teaching. She cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized books and supplies, and created lesson plans for students of various ages and abilities. In the evenings, she arranged her modest belongings in the teacher's cottage, making the small space feel like home. Mason stopped by each day, sometimes bringing small gifts, a potted geranium for her windowsill, a loaf of fresh bread from the bakery, a handmade wooden rack for drying clothes. "Just some welcome presents," he would say casually, though the thoughtfulness behind each item suggested something deeper than simple neighborliness. They would talk for a while during these visits, Victoria learning more about Timber Creek and its inhabitants, Mason discovering her love of literature and music. Each conversation revealed new layers to the other, building a foundation of friendship that felt both solid and exhilarating. By Sunday morning, Victoria found herself counting the minutes until Mason was due to arrive for their ride. She chose her simplest riding habit, a practical navy blue ensemble that wouldn't show dust, and pinned her hair securely beneath a small hat. Mrs. Parker, who had helped Victoria move to the cottage but still took a motherly interest in her welfare, raised an eyebrow at Victoria's obvious excitement but said nothing beyond. "Have a lovely time, dear." Mason arrived precisely at 10, leading 2 horses, his own black stallion and a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "This is Daisy," he said as he helped Victoria mount. "Steadiest horse in my stable. No rattlesnakes will spook her, I promise." Victoria laughed, settling comfortably in the saddle. "I trust your judgment." They rode at a leisurely pace out of town, Mason pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. Once they left the main road, the landscape opened up around them, rolling hills covered in spring wildflowers, stands of pine trees in the distance, and always the majestic mountains on the horizon. "It's breathtaking," Victoria said, genuinely awestruck by the beauty surrounding them. "So different from Boston." "Good different or bad different?" Mason asked, watching her face. "Wonderfully different. There's so much space." She spread her arms wide as if trying to embrace the vastness. "Room to breathe, to think, to be whoever you want to be." Mason nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why I came west, needed that space." It was the perfect opening, and Victoria took it gently. "Why did you need a fresh start, Mason, if you don't mind my asking?" He was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, as if carefully choosing each word. "I was married once back in Colorado. Her name was Sarah. We had a small ranch there, not unlike the one I have now." He paused, eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "There was a renegade Comanche who'd broken from the reservation. I was in town getting supplies. By the time I got back, Victoria's heart ached for him. Oh, Mason, I'm so sorry. Happened 6 years ago now. I stayed another year trying to make it work, but everything there reminded me of her. So I sold up, headed north, and started over in Timber Creek." He turned to look at Victoria, his expression softening. "First time I've told anyone that story in a long while." Victoria reached across the space between their horses and placed her hand briefly on his arm. "Thank you for trusting me with it." He covered her hand with his own for a moment, the touch sending warmth through her despite the layers of fabric between them. "There's something about you, Victoria Sinclair, something that makes a man want to open up." They rode in companionable silence after that, cresting a hill that revealed a picturesque valley below. A modest but well-built ranch house stood near a small creek, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals where cattle grazed in the distance. "Welcome to the Double R," Mason said, a note of pride entering his voice. "Not much compared to the big spreads, but it's mine. Paid for free and clear last year." "It's wonderful," Victoria said sincerely. The house was larger than she'd expected, constructed of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and a small vegetable garden flourished along the southern wall. Mason led the way down to the ranch, where they were greeted by an older man who emerged from one of the outbuildings. "Miss Sinclair, this is Virgil Cooper, my foreman and right-hand man. Virgil, meet Miss Victoria Sinclair, Timber Creek's new schoolteacher." Virgil, a weathered man with kind eyes and a shock of white hair, tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, heard good things about you already." "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Cooper. Just Virgil, please. Mr. Cooper was my pa, and he's been gone 30 years now." He turned to Mason. "Everything's handled here. You two enjoy your visit." After Virgil returned to his work, Mason helped Victoria dismount and led her toward the house. "Hope you don't mind, but I thought we might have dinner here, Mrs. Williams. She comes in to cook and clean a few days a week, left us a stew simmering." The idea of sharing a meal alone with Mason in his home sent a flutter of nervous excitement through Victoria's stomach. It wasn't exactly proper, but as he'd said, frontier standards were different. And something told her she could trust Mason Reed implicitly. "That sounds lovely," she replied. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture, clean lines, and a few thoughtful touches that spoke of care and attention. A bookshelf in the main room held more volumes than Victoria would have expected, and a piano stood in one corner, its surface polished to a shine. "You play?" she asked, surprised. Mason shook his head. "Sarah did. I keep it tuned, though I'm not sure why." He ran a hand over the smooth wood. Do you? Yes, actually, I had lessons from childhood. Would you? He gestured toward the instrument. Victoria sat on the bench and lifted the cover, revealing keys that were indeed perfectly tuned when she pressed them experimentally. She began to play a simple melody, one of Chopin's preludes that had always brought her comfort. Mason stood beside the piano, watching her hands move across the keys with an expression of such tender wonder that Victoria felt her heart might burst. When she finished, the last note lingering in the air between them, he said softly, "That's the first time it's been played in 5 years." The significance of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. Victoria had brought music back into a home that had known only silence, just as Mason had brought protection and kindness to her when she'd needed it most. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for letting me play." The meal that followed was simple but delicious hearty beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. They talked easily throughout, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams for the future. Victoria found herself opening up about her strained relationship with her father, her love of teaching, and her hope to make a difference in her students' lives. "You will," Mason assured her. "This town needs someone like you, someone who sees beyond the rough edges to the potential underneath." As the afternoon waned, Mason showed her around the rest of the property, introducing her to his prized horses and explaining his plans for expanding the herd. Victoria listened attentively, finding herself genuinely interested in the details of ranch life that would have seemed utterly foreign to her just weeks ago. All too soon, it was time to return to town. As they rode back, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and amber, Victoria realized she hadn't felt this content this alive in years, perhaps ever. "Thank you for today," she said as they approached the outskirts of Timber Creek. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more." "The pleasure was all mine," Mason replied, his eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. Perhaps we could make this a regular outing, Sundays I mean." Victoria's heart leaped at the suggestion. "I'd like that very much." They reached the teacher's cottage just as twilight was deepening into night. Mason helped her down from Daisy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Are you nervous? About tomorrow?" he clarified. "A little," Victoria admitted. "What if the children don't like me? What if I'm not what this town needs?" Mason's expression turned serious. "Victoria, you're exactly what this town needs. What those children need. You'll be wonderful." The conviction in his voice gave her courage. "Thank you for believing in me." They stood there in the gathering darkness, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Mason took a small step back, breaking the spell. "I should let you rest. Big day tomorrow." "Yes," Victoria agreed reluctantly. "Will I see you? After school, I mean." Mason smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. "Count on it." As she watched him ride away, leading Daisy behind him, Victoria felt a certainty settling deep in her bones. Something significant had begun between them, something with the potential to change both their lives forever. And for the first time in her life, she was ready to embrace that change, wherever it might lead. The next morning, Victoria rang her new brass bell from the schoolhouse steps, heart pounding with anticipation as children began to appear from various directions. They came in all sizes, from tiny first-years clutching lunch pails to lanky teenagers trying to appear uninterested. Parents accompanied the youngest ones, eyeing Victoria with cautious optimism. "Good morning," she called brightly. "I'm Miss Sinclair, your new teacher. Welcome to school." The children filed in, some shy, others boldly curious about the new face at the front of the room. Victoria had them introduce themselves one by one, carefully memorizing names and faces. There was freckle-faced Tommy Wilson, barely 6 years old and missing his front teeth. The Miller twins, Sarah and Samuel, who finished each other's sentences. Shy Elizabeth Cooper, who Victoria learned was Virgil's granddaughter. And 16-year-old James Hollister, the mayor's eldest son, who seemed determined to appear completely disinterested in education. By lunchtime, Victoria had assessed reading levels, assigned appropriate work, and begun to get a sense of each child's strengths and challenges. Teaching multiple grades simultaneously was demanding, but she found she enjoyed the variety and pace. The morning flew by, and before she knew it, she was standing on the steps again, watching her students scatter for their midday meal. "Seems to be going well," came a familiar voice. Victoria turned to find Mason leaning against a nearby tree, a smile playing at his lips. Her heart gave a foolish little leap at the sight of him. "You came," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Said I would, didn't I?" He approached, handing her a small package wrapped in cloth. "Thought you might need some sustenance. Mrs. Williams packed extra biscuits and ham this morning." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Victoria deeply. "Thank you. I was so nervous I forgot to prepare anything for myself." They sat together on the schoolhouse steps, sharing the simple meal as Victoria recounted her morning impressions of each student. Mason listened attentively, occasionally adding bits of background about the families that helped her understand her pupils better. "James Hollister is going to be your biggest challenge," he warned. "Bright boy, but his father expects him to follow in his political footsteps. James would rather work with horses. Been trying to convince the mayor to let him apprentice at my ranch part-time. Perhaps we can find a way to incorporate his interests into his studies," Victoria mused. "Essays on horse breeding or the mathematics of ranch management." Mason looked at her with undisguised admiration. "You're something else, Victoria Sinclair." Before she could respond, the children began returning, eyeing Mason's presence with interest. He stood, brushing crumbs from his trousers. "Best let you get back to it. Dinner tonight at the hotel restaurant." The invitation was casual, but his eyes held a warmth that suggested it meant more than a simple meal. "I'd like that," Victoria replied, suddenly aware of several pairs of young ears listening intently. As Mason departed with a tip of his hat, 10-year-old Abigail Jenkins sidled up to Victoria. "Is Mr. Reed your beau, Miss Sinclair?" she asked with the direct curiosity only children can muster. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Reed is a friend, Abigail. Now, shall we continue with our arithmetic lesson?" The afternoon session went as smoothly as the morning, though Victoria caught several of the girls whispering and giggling whenever they thought she wasn't looking. It seemed her connection with Mason had already become a topic of interest among her students. In a small town like Timber Creek, she supposed that was inevitable. When the final bell rang and the last student had departed, Victoria allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. Her first day had been a success. The children had responded well to her teaching style, and she'd already begun forming connections with each of them. This was what she had come west for, the chance to make a difference, to build something meaningful on her own terms. She was tidying the classroom when a knock at the open door made her look up. Expecting Mason, she was surprised to see Mayor Hollister standing there instead. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted her. "Thought I'd stop by to see how your first day went." "Very well, thank you," Victoria replied, setting down the books she'd been shelving. "You have some bright children in this town." The mayor nodded, pleased. "James says you assigned him an essay on the economic impact of the railroad on cattle ranching." Victoria tensed slightly, wondering if she'd overstepped. "I thought it might engage his interests while still meeting the curriculum requirements." To her relief, Mayor Hollister laughed. "It's the first time I've seen that boy willingly open a book in months. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." They chatted for a few more minutes about the school and the town's expectations before the mayor cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Sinclair, there's another matter I feel I should address. I understand you and Mason Reed have been spending time together." Victoria straightened her spine, determined to maintain her dignity. "Mr. Reed has been very kind in helping me settle into Timber Creek. Mason's a good man," the mayor said carefully. "Best rancher in the county, respected member of the community. But he's had his share of troubles and people talk. With all due respect, Mayor Hollister, my personal associations are my own affair, provided they don't interfere with my duties as teacher." The mayor raised his hands in a placating gesture. "No offense intended, Miss Sinclair. Just want to make sure you understand the way small towns work. Your reputation matters here, especially as someone entrusted with our children." Victoria softened her tone. "I appreciate your concern, truly, but I assure you, Mr. Reed has been nothing but a gentleman, and I value his friendship greatly." Mayor Hollister studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, just be careful. Not everyone in town is as understanding as I am." With that cryptic warning, he bid her good day and left. Victoria sat at her desk, turning the conversation over in her mind. What had the mayor been implying about Mason's troubles? Was it simply his tragic past, or something more? And why should anyone object to their friendship? She was still pondering these questions when Mason himself appeared at the doorway, looking every inch the handsome cowboy in his clean shirt and vest, hat in hand. "Ready for dinner?" he asked, then frowned slightly at her expression. "Something wrong?" Victoria hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Mayor Hollister was just here. He seemed concerned about our friendship." Mason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did he now? He mentioned you'd had troubles. I assumed he meant what happened in Colorado." Mason sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Partly that, but there's more to it." He seemed to debate with himself before continuing. "When I first came to Timber Creek, I was angry, drinking too much, getting into fights, took Virgil and a few others to straighten me out." Victoria listened without judgment, seeing the pain behind his admission. "There was also some disagreement about land," Mason continued. "The property I bought had been promised unofficially to the Hollisters for generations. Some folks think I swooped in and stole it, though I paid fair and square." "Is that why the mayor warned me about my reputation?" Mason's expression darkened. "He said that?" Not in so many words, but the implication was clear. "I'm sorry, Victoria. The last thing I want is to cause you any trouble." He straightened, his voice turning formal. "Perhaps it would be better if—" "Don't," Victoria interrupted, moving toward him with sudden determination. "Don't you dare suggest we shouldn't be friends because of town gossip." The tension in Mason's shoulders eased slightly. "You're sure? Your position here is secure as long as I teach well," Victoria finished firmly. "And I intend to do exactly that. Now I believe you promised me dinner." The smile that spread across Mason's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. He offered his arm, and Victoria took it without hesitation. Let the town talk, she knew the quality of the man beside her, and that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Victoria threw herself into teaching, developing innovative lessons that engaged even her most reluctant students. Word of her success spread, and soon parents were stopping by to express their appreciation for the positive changes they'd seen in their children. Mason became a regular fixture in her life. They dined together several times a week, rode on Sundays, and often simply enjoyed each other's company on her cottage porch in the evenings. Sometimes he would bring his guitar, playing softly while Victoria sang or simply listened. Other times they would read together, sharing passages from favorite books. Their connection deepened with each passing day, but Mason never presumed beyond friendship, though Victoria increasingly found herself wishing he would. The first time their hands accidentally touched over a shared book, the jolt of awareness that shot through her was unmistakable. When he helped her mount her horse, his hands at her waist sent heat spreading through her body. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she would catch him watching her with such longing that it made her breath catch. But always, he maintained a respectful distance, as if uncertain of her feelings or perhaps his own right to pursue them. May turned to June, and the school term neared its conclusion. Victoria had agreed to stay on for the fall term, much to the town's delight and Mason's barely concealed joy. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Mason finally broke the unspoken barrier between them. "Victoria," he said, his voice lower and more serious than usual. "There's something I need to tell you." Her heart quickened. Yes. These past months having you in my life, it's been like coming back to life after a long winter. He turned to face her, eyes earnest in the fading light. I never thought I'd feel this way again, never wanted to if I'm honest. Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. Mason. Let me finish, please. He took a deep breath. I respect you too much to keep pretending I only want friendship, but I understand if that's all you want from me. I'd rather have that than nothing at all. The vulnerability in his expression undid her. Without overthinking, Victoria reached out and took his hand in hers. I want more too, she whispered. I have for some time now. The hope that dawned on Mason's face was beautiful to behold. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Victoria closed the remaining distance between them, and their lips met in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. It was brief and chaste, but it changed everything. When they parted, Mason rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. I'm falling in love with you, Victoria Sinclair, he murmured. Have been since the moment you said you'd never been in a man's arms before. Victoria smiled, remembering her embarrassed confession that first day. And I've been falling for you since you told me not to leave them. Mason chuckled softly, drawing back to look into her eyes. I meant it then. Mean it even more now. They sat together as night fell completely, talking about feelings long held back, sharing hopes and fears. When Mason finally rose to leave, he kissed her once more at the doorway, lingering a bit longer this time. Sunday? He asked, the single word now loaded with new meaning. Sunday, she confirmed, already counting the hours. As Victoria prepared for bed that night, her lips still tingling from Mason's kiss, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just a few short months. The frightened young woman who had fled Boston to escape an unwanted marriage had found not just independence, but something far more precious, the possibility of a love freely chosen, based on mutual respect and genuine affection. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future with Mason teaching in the schoolhouse by day, coming home to the ranch in the evenings, building a life together in this wild, beautiful country that had already claimed her heart. Such dreams had never been part of her plan when she journeyed west, but now she couldn't imagine wanting anything else. Sunday dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day for riding. Victoria dressed with extra care, choosing a cornflower blue riding habit that Mason had once mentioned brought out the color of her eyes. She was just pinning her hat when she heard hoofbeats approaching, earlier than expected. To her surprise, it wasn't Mason but Virgil Cooper who appeared at her door, his expression grave. Miss Sinclair, he said, removing his hat. I'm afraid there's been an incident at the ranch. Mason asked me to fetch you. Fear clutched at Victoria's heart. Is he hurt? No, madam, not him. But there's trouble. Best if you come now. Without further questions, Victoria gathered her skirts and mounted the horse Virgil had brought for her. They rode hard toward the Double R, Virgil explaining the situation as they went. Raiders hit before dawn, drove off about 20 head of cattle. Mason and the boys tracked them to Sawyer's Gorge, but then Rory Jenkins took a bullet. Mason sent the others back with the boy while he continued alone. Alone, Victoria's alarm increased. Against armed cattle thieves, he's tracked their leader, man named Pike Sullivan. They have history from Colorado days. Virgil's voice was grim. Mason recognized his methods. Victoria's mind raced. The man who led the raid that killed his wife, Virgil shot her a surprised look. He told you about that? Some of it. Then you understand why he's gone after Sullivan himself. It's personal. They crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, and Victoria could see activity around the bunkhouse, men moving with purpose, a wagon being prepared. The boy, she asked anxiously, Doc's with him now. Bullet went clean through his shoulder. He'll recover. Virgil guided them toward the main house. Mason left something for you, said to bring you straight to his study if you came. Inside, Virgil led her to a small room lined with bookshelves. On the desk lay an envelope with Victoria's name written in Mason's bold hand. Virgil respectfully withdrew, leaving her alone to read it. Victoria, forgive me for missing our ride. By now Virgil will have explained what's happened. Sullivan is the man who took Sarah from me, and I've hunted him for years. I can't let him escape again. I don't know what will happen when I find him, but I couldn't leave without telling you what's in my heart. You've brought light back into my life when I thought all was darkness. Whatever happens today, know that I love you completely and without reservation. If I don't return, the ranch is yours. Everything I have is yours. But I promise I'll do everything in my power to come back to you. Wait for me. Mason Victoria pressed the letter to her chest, fear and determination warring within her. She couldn't sit and wait, not when Mason was in danger. But what could she do? She found Virgil organizing the men outside. I'm going after him, she announced. The foreman shook his head firmly. No, madam, too dangerous. Mason would have my hide. I wasn't asking permission, Victoria replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm going. You can either help me or watch me go alone. The men exchanged looks, clearly torn between loyalty to Mason and admiration for her courage. Finally, Virgil sighed. You're as stubborn as he is. Fine, but you'll need a guide. Jake here knows Sawyer's Gorge better than anyone. He nodded toward a wiry cowhand. And you'll take Bess, she's sure-footed in rough country. Within minutes, Victoria had changed into borrowed trousers and a flannel shirt from one of the ranch hands' wives, her riding habit deemed too cumbersome for the rough terrain ahead. The transformation shocked her as much as the men, but practicality outweighed propriety in this situation. Sullivan has 4 men with him, Jake explained as they rode out, Virgil and 2 others following behind. They'll be holed up in the old mining camp at the north end of the gorge. Only one way in, but there's a back trail few know about. Victoria listened intently, fear for Mason driving her forward despite the danger. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the gorge, forcing them to slow their pace. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a ridge overlooking a narrow canyon. Jake signaled for silence, pointing to a plume of smoke rising from a cluster of dilapidated structures below. That's them. Mason's horse is there. He indicated a black stallion tethered near one of the buildings. No sign of him, though. Victoria's heart sank. If they had Mason's horse but no Mason in sight, she refused to complete the thought. The back trail, she whispered. Jake nodded, leading them carefully along the ridge until they reached a narrow path winding down the steep slope. Single file they descended, every loose stone threatening to give away their position. At the bottom, they secured their horses and continued on foot, moving silently through the scrub brush. As they neared the abandoned mining camp, they could hear voices rough, angry men arguing among themselves. Should have killed him outright, one was saying. Pike's playing with fire, keeping him alive. Pike wants him to suffer, another replied. Can't blame him after what Reed did to his brother. Victoria exchanged a glance with Jake. Mason was alive, at least for now. They crept closer until they could see into the camp's central clearing. What she saw made her blood run cold. Mason was on his knees, hands bound behind him, face bloody but defiant. A tall man with a scar running down one cheek stood over him, pistol in hand. 5 years I've waited for this, Reed, the man Pike Sullivan, she presumed, was saying. 5 years planning how to make you pay for shooting Liam. Your brother drew first, Mason replied, his voice steady despite his obvious pain, and he died quick. More than he deserved after what he did to Sarah. Sullivan backhanded Mason across the face, drawing fresh blood. You don't speak her name. She chose Liam before you stole her away. Victoria's mind reeled at this revelation. There was more to the story than Mason had shared. She left your gang because she wanted a decent life, Mason said. One you and your brother couldn't give her. Sullivan raised his gun again, pressing it to Mason's temple. I'm going to enjoy watching you die slow, Reed. But first, I think I'll pay a visit to that pretty schoolteacher everyone says you're sweet on. Maybe take her the way Liam took your wife before he killed her. Victoria saw the flash of raw fear cross Mason's face at the threat, followed by a rage so pure it transformed his features. "You touch her and I'll haunt you from the grave," he growled. Sullivan laughed cruelly. Brave words from a dead man. Victoria had heard enough. She touched Jake's arm, whispering her plan. He nodded grimly and relayed it to the others. On his signal, Virgil and his men would create a diversion at the camp's main entrance, while Jake led Victoria to a position where she could free Mason during the confusion. The plan worked better than she could have hoped. When gunshots and shouts erupted from the canyon entrance, Sullivan and his men turned as one, giving Jake and Victoria the opening they needed to slip behind the building where Mason was held. Jake took out the lone guard with a quick, silent blow, then covered the entrance while Victoria rushed to Mason's side. "Victoria," he gasped, disbelief warring with fear in his eyes. "What in God's name?" "Hush," she whispered, working at his bonds with a knife Jake had given her. "We're getting you out of here. You shouldn't have come. If Sullivan sees you, he won't." The ropes finally gave way and Mason staggered to his feet, wincing in pain. Victoria saw now that he had a bullet wound in his left leg, hastily bandaged but still seeping blood. Jake appeared at the doorway. "Now or never," he urged. "Virgil's men have them pinned down, but they won't hold for long." Supporting Mason between them, they made their way to the back trail where they'd left the horses. Progress was agonizingly slow with Mason's injury, but determination drove them forward. They had nearly reached their mounts when a shout behind them froze their blood. "Reed!" They turned to see Sullivan standing 50 yards away, rifle raised. In the split second before he fired, Mason shoved Victoria aside, taking the bullet meant for her in his shoulder. The impact spun him around, but he remained standing, drawing his own gun recovered by Jake during the rescue with remarkable speed despite his injuries. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Sullivan crumpled to the ground, a look of surprise etched on his face. Mason swayed but stayed upright, Victoria rushing to support him. "Nice shot," Jake said, checking to make sure Sullivan was dead. "Had a lot of motivation," Mason replied grimly, looking down at Victoria with a mixture of love and exasperation. "What were you thinking, coming after me like that?" "I was thinking I couldn't lose you," she answered simply. "Not when I've just found you." The ride back to the ranch was torturous for Mason, but he refused to stop until they were safely home. Doc Peterson was waiting, having already treated young Rory's wound and immediately set to work on Mason's injuries. "Bullet's still in your shoulder," he reported grimly. "Need to get it out now before infection sets in. The leg's not as bad, went clean through muscle, missed the bone." Victoria insisted on staying during the procedure, holding Mason's hand as the doctor extracted the bullet without the luxury of anesthesia. Mason bore the pain in stoic silence, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face as if drawing strength from her presence. When it was finally over, the doctor bound both wounds tightly and administered laudanum for the pain. "He needs rest," he told Victoria. "Lots of it. And someone to watch for fever." "I'll stay with him," she said without hesitation. The doctor raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Call me if his temperature rises or the wounds start to look inflamed." After everyone had gone, leaving them alone in Mason's bedroom, Victoria pulled a chair beside the bed and gently smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "You scared me half to death," she admonished softly. "Speak for yourself," Mason replied, his voice weak but his eyes clear. "Finding you in Sullivan's camp nearly stopped my heart." Victoria took his hand, pressing it to her cheek. "I couldn't just wait here, not knowing if you were alive or dead. My brave, foolish woman." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I think I fell in love with you all over again today." "Good," Victoria said firmly. "Because I'm not going anywhere, Mason Reed, not now, not ever." His eyes, heavy with exhaustion and medication, began to close. "Promise," he murmured. "I promise," she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Now rest." Over the next week, Victoria divided her time between the schoolhouse where final examinations were underway and Mason's bedside. The town buzzed with the story of Sullivan's defeat and Victoria's part in the rescue, opinions ranging from scandalized to admiring. Mayor Hollister himself paid a visit, officially to check on Mason's recovery, but clearly also to assess the situation between him and the school teacher. The town council has met, he informed them stiffly, standing at the foot of Mason's bed while Victoria sat beside it. We've unanimously agreed to offer Miss Sinclair a permanent position, provided certain proprieties are observed. Mason, still weak but improving daily, raised an eyebrow. Meaning, the mayor said with a pointed look at their clasped hands, that while we value Miss Sinclair's teaching abilities enormously, we expect our school teacher to maintain certain standards of behavior. Victoria straightened her spine. Mayor Hollister, I assure you, what the mayor is trying to say, Mason interrupted, his voice gaining strength, is that he expects us to marry if you're to continue living at my ranch and teaching in his town. The bluntness of his statement brought color to Victoria's cheeks and a look of discomfort to the mayor's face. Well, yes, Hollister admitted. That would resolve the situation quite satisfactorily. An awkward silence fell, broken only when Mason shifted painfully in the bed. If you gentlemen would excuse us, Victoria said firmly, Mr. Reed needs his rest. After the mayor departed, Victoria remained by the window, looking out at the ranch spread before her. Mason watched her, concern etching his features. Victoria, he said softly. I apologize if that was uncomfortable. Hollister had no right. Is that how you imagined proposing? She asked, still facing the window. Through the mayor's ultimatum, Mason's face fell. No, God, no. I had plans after I recovered. I was going to take you to that meadow you love with the wildflowers. Had a ring made in Denver months ago. She turned then, her expression softening at the distress in his voice. Months ago, since April, he admitted, just been waiting for the right moment. He held out his hand to her. Victoria, please come here. She moved to his side, taking his outstretched hand. I'm sorry, that wasn't fair of me. No, I'm sorry, this isn't how it was supposed to happen. He drew her down to sit beside him on the bed, but I meant what I said in that letter. I love you, Victoria Sinclair, with everything I am, and if you'll have me, broken and battered as I am, I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Is that an official proposal, Mr. Reed? It is. He reached with his good arm to the drawer of his bedside table, retrieving a small velvet box. Had Virgil fetched this from my safe yesterday, was hoping for a more romantic setting, but he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect diamond. Victoria Sinclair, will you marry me? The tears spilled over as Victoria nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Mason Reed. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her gently down for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. I suppose we should thank the mayor, Victoria said with a watery laugh. His timing was terrible, but his intentions weren't entirely misplaced. Mason chuckled, wincing slightly as the movement jarred his shoulder. I'll send him a fruit basket. After we're married. They decided on a simple ceremony at the end of the school term, just 2 weeks away. Word spread quickly through town, and soon Victoria found herself the recipient of countless well wishes and offers of assistance with wedding preparations. Even those who had initially disapproved of her relationship with Mason seemed to come around once an official engagement was announced. The day before the wedding, Victoria stood in her nearly empty cottage, packing the last of her belongings. The school term had ended successfully, with all her students advancing to the next grade and several parents commenting on the remarkable progress their children had made under her guidance. She would return in the fall as Mrs. Reed, riding in from the ranch each day to continue the work she loved. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Parker holding a carefully wrapped package. Wedding present, the widow explained, handing it to Victoria, something every bride should have. Inside was a beautiful handmade quilt, pieced together from squares of various blue fabrics that matched the color of Victoria's eyes. "It's exquisite," she breathed. "Did you make this?" Mrs. Parker nodded, a touch of pride in her expression. "Been working on it since the day Mason brought you to my boarding house. Knew then he'd finally found what he'd been looking for." Victoria embraced the older woman, touched beyond words by the gift and its meaning. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Parker. For welcoming me to Timber Creek, for your guidance. For making sure you two didn't scandalize the town before making it official," the widow finished with a twinkle in her eye. "Just doing my Christian duty, dear. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day." The wedding took place on the ranch, under a canopy of blue sky with the mountains standing witness in the distance. Mason, fully recovered except for a slight limp that might always remain, waited by an archway covered in wildflowers that the schoolchildren had gathered. Victoria walked toward him on Mayor Hollister's arm, wearing a simple ivory gown ordered from Denver and carrying a bouquet of prairie blooms. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Mason whispered when she reached him. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the couple exchanging vows they had written themselves. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Mason drew Victoria into a kiss that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings, prompting cheers from the assembled guests and a few good-natured whistles from his ranch hands. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing despite Mason's leg. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land they now shared, he led her away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. "Happy, Mrs. Reed?" he asked, arms wrapped around her from behind as they watched the day's final light paint the landscape in amber and rose. "Completely," Victoria replied, leaning back against his chest. "Though I'm still getting used to the name. You could keep Sinclair for teaching if you prefer." She turned in his arms to face him. "No, I want to be Victoria Reed in every part of my life. I'm proud to carry your name." Mason's eyes darkened with emotion. "I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you. You already are." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I told you I'd never been in a man's arms before?" His lips curved into a smile. "I said, then don't ever leave mine." "And I haven't," Victoria whispered. "Not really. Not since that moment." Mason lowered his head to capture her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, the family they would build, the love they would share, the life they would create in this wild, beautiful land that had brought them to each other. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above, they walked hand in hand back to the house that was now truly their home, ready to begin the next chapter of their story together. Epilogue: 5 years later, Victoria Reed stood on the porch of the Double R Ranch house, watching the evening sun sink toward the horizon. The years had been kind to the land, and to those who worked at the ranch had prospered under Mason's careful management, the herd nearly tripling in size. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family. She smiled as the sound of childish laughter floated from inside, followed by Mason's deeper chuckle. Their twin daughters, Sarah and Margaret, had just turned 4, bundles of energy with their father's blue eyes and their mother's honey-brown hair. The new baby, Robert, slept peacefully in his cradle, not yet 3 months old but already showing signs of his father's strong will. The schoolhouse in town now had an assistant teacher to help on the days when Victoria needed to be home with the children, but she still taught full-time when possible, her passion for education undiminished by the passage of time. Her students from that first year were growing up, some working alongside their parents, others pursuing further education in Denver or beyond, all carrying with them the knowledge and confidence she had helped instill. Mason appeared in the doorway, a daughter perched on each hip. "These young ladies are requesting a bedtime story from their mama," he announced. "Something about a brave teacher and a handsome cowboy." Victoria laughed, reaching to take Margaret from him. Again, that's the third time this week. It's their favorite, Mason said with a wink. Mine too, come to think of it. Later, after the children were tucked in and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Mason and Victoria sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. I had a letter from my father today, Victoria said softly. He's finally agreed to visit in the spring, wants to meet his grandchildren. Mason nodded, pressing a kiss to her temple. About time. Think he's forgiven you for not marrying old Harrison? I think seeing our success changed his mind. The photographs I sent of the children probably helped too. She smiled up at him. Are you ready to meet the formidable William Sinclair? After facing down Pike Sullivan, I think I can handle your father, Mason replied with a grin. Besides, I have something he doesn't. What's that? Mason's eyes softened as he gazed at her. His daughter's heart. Victoria leaned up to kiss him, marveling at how the years had only deepened their connection. The passion between them burned as strongly as ever, tempered now by the comfortable intimacy that comes with shared history and mutual respect. Do you ever regret it? Mason asked suddenly. Coming west, I mean. You could have had a comfortable life in Boston for all its constraints. Victoria considered the question seriously before answering. Not for a moment. Everything that matters to me is here you, our children, my school, this land. She gestured toward the moonlit landscape surrounding them. This is where I belong, where we belong. Mason pulled her closer, his voice dropping to the low, intimate tone that still sent shivers down her spine after all these years. Remember what I told you that first day. Victoria smiled against his chest. You told me not to leave your arms. Best advice I ever gave, he murmured, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. Because you never did. And I never will, Victoria promised softly. As night settled fully over the Double R Ranch, bringing with it a canopy of stars and the soothing sounds of the wilderness, Mason and Victoria Reed remained on their porch, wrapped in each other's arms and in the life they had built together, a life neither could have imagined that fateful day when a runaway horse and a chance rescue brought them together. It wasn't always easy, this life they'd chosen. The frontier demanded resilience, courage, and hard work. But together they had found strength to face whatever challenges came their way, their love a constant in a changing world, their family a testament to the power of taking chances and following one's heart. And as they finally rose to retire for the night, Mason taking Victoria's hand to lead her inside to their bed, both knew with absolute certainty that they had found what most people only dream of, a love worth risking everything for. A partnership built on mutual respect and unwavering support, and a shared life that, for all its trials, had brought them joy beyond measure. For Victoria, who had once confessed she'd never been in a man's arms, and for Mason, who had promised she need never leave his, their journey together had only just begun.